Hi, everyone. Um, I'm gonna just invite Ron. He's here. Hello.
Hi, Heidi.
How are you? It's our first time actually seeing each other. Well,
Right,
now one time on a Zoom, one time on like a lot of people.
right. Can you hear me
I
okay?
can hear you. Do you want to use your headphones?
No, I think this works well.
Okay, you can hear me.
hmm I can.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us. And just to welcome everybody who's listening, we're having another episode of CAMPO Conversations today, where we talk to participants from the upcoming CAMPO Art Fest, CAF 8, that is happening on December 20th, 29th, and 30th, and some artists in residence. And today I am very, very excited to be here with Ronald Rael, right?
Yeah, that's
In
me.
Espanol, Rael. And I feel very honored to be talking to you and that you're coming down here in 1 week, which is really exciting. Um, so I met Ron through Michael Diaz de Leon last summer by who was our chef in residence, who I met from Molly and James. So shout out to all you guys. And Michael said, you got to meet this guy. I didn't know your work. And he showed me the project that you guys were doing or that you did in Denver, outside of Denver, the movie theater.
hmm
Uh,
It's about 4 hours from Denver. It's in a different part of the state.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
it's
I took one look at it and I was like, get him down here. And I wrote you and you're like, yes, I want to come. And it was like, boom, boom, boom. And now you're coming. Um, so Ron is, I'm gonna get this like not exactly correct. So I want you to fill in the blanks, and I'm gonna read a little bit. He is an architect, human rights and environmental advocate. He is the founder of Earth Architecture, co-owner of the architecture design firm Lab, a lot of different things in Rael Fratello. I am saying it with an accent because I live here, but that's okay. Founder of Emerging Objects, which is a 3D printing make tank that I want to talk about today. He's a professor at UC Berkeley, still, right? Forever.
yep.
He is an award winner of many things that we will also talk about some of those projects, and the author of a lot of books. I think one that people have probably heard of is Border Wall as Architecture, which I think is really kind of fascinating. And I want to talk about that too. Um, so really, I mean, I did a little bit of research on you and I didn't really realize the extent of everything that you do. So like, I don't know if you call yourself an artist as well or architect, designer, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, you're clearly like one of the most talented artists that I know now. And I can't believe the breadth of your work. Um, and I thought maybe we could start a little bit at the beginning and talk about where you came from and how you got into architecture and then where that took you. And then maybe talk a little bit about themes through your work, through your past work and present work, which is pretty sensational, I have to say. Um, and and it's all very interesting because our themes, like you fit into all of our themes from the past 4 years for Art Fest. I don't know if you know that, but we went from on progress to the unintended effects of human action in nature, to last year radical nature, the roots of land and water, and this year unsettled on movement and migration. And I feel like everything that you do, design, write about, probably think about, has to do with one or all of those subjects. Or themes mashed together. But let's start at the beginning. Tell me, Who are you? There, where? Tell me a little bit about you. Where? I know you're born in Colorado, but tell us a little bit about that and how you got into architecture.
Yeah, thanks, Heidi, for that generous introduction. Yeah, I, I'm in the beginning. I grew up on a small ranch in on the border of southern Colorado and northern New Mexico, and it's pretty isolated where I grew up. Not a lot of people at all, so a very tight community, and a community of my family mostly for the first 18 years of my life on that ranch. Only about 24 people, and I was related to all of them. And
Wow.
yeah, so it was a life of a lot of doing and a lot of making. My father was someone who did so many things, from teach at the school to drive the bus to build houses to run a ranch. And my mother right alongside of him, as well as my grandparents and even great grandparents, lived on the ranch. So there was a lot of ideas of, community coming together around uh, life
Hmm.
and the making of that life. And in that village, there were many adobe houses. I still live in my great grandfather's house in that village, and I own the house that his sister's family ended up building and living in. So, and they were made of adobe. And in this place where I grew up, it was once the northernmost frontier of Mexico. Uh, in a place called the Valle de San Luis. It's the largest alpine valley in the world, and it's the northernmost territory of Mexico prior to the Mexican-American War. And so a lot of the themes that you mentioned and the themes that I explore in my work, they look at what it means to embody and inhabit a borderland scenario,
Hmm.
and a borderland that's constantly evolving, a borderland that traverses time and space and place. In other words, there's a borderland today that we're more familiar with, and it's a borderland that's full of controversy and full of possibility and full of violence and full of joy. And we see the legacy of the borderland in southern Colorado and northern New Mexico today. And so it's also about expanding that notion of what a borderland is and thinking about how those issues relate. And so, you mentioned a lot of titles that people ascribe to my work: design, architecture, art. uh, I probably never put one of those titles on the things I do, only because in the borderlands it's ambiguous, right? You're neither uh, American, you're neither Mexican, you're neither Native American. You're, in some ways, all three of those things and more combined, and the things you do are also combined when you make things in the world. And so that's a lot about what my practice deals with, and the things that I talk about and I try to express through the things I make.
When you were growing up, could you feel, I mean, was it, could you feel the dissonance and the hardship? I mean, as you were making, as I mean, it was a tiny little village, but did you feel like the ancestral ties were speaking to you? And what made you want to go into architecture specifically?
Um, yeah, I think I did feel those. I think I felt in some way confusion and curiosity. My grandparents, even my mother, didn't have electricity till the year the year before I was born. They didn't have electricity or running water, and so to just walk down the road to my grandparents' house, I felt like I was going back in time, and there was an experience there of life with of life that's very self-sustaining, that's outside of a system. They were growing all their foods, they were drying them, they were canning them, they were uh, tending to animals, butchering animals, and then in my own home, my father was a school teacher. We had a very humble uh, upbringing, but my father built the house. It was wood, and so just moving between worlds. And then there was the reality of TV. We had three channels, but I thought because I was very isolated, I actually thought the rest of the world lives like that. And this world is like this. And in some ways that had a lot of, gave me a lot of insecurity, but a lot of confusion and a lot of curiosity to know what that other world was and trying to reconcile these worlds. And the history of where I was from was not something that was taught in school, wasn't even discussed. So the fact that half of my life was in speaking Spanish, half of my life was in speaking English, that was also something like, what is this all about? I don't. So as a young person, there was a lot to think about when you're moving between cultures and spaces and technologies, and I think, I don't know why, I never thought about, I didn't know an architect existed, and my father built buildings, and and life was hard on the ranch. I thought my father tried to convince me to stay on the ranch, and I said, well, I gotta try something else. This is really hard. And so I went to college. I thought you could only be a doctor or an engineer if you went to college, so I chose doctor, and it was a struggle. And every day on my way to class, I'd walk by the architecture school, and it just looked really familiar and interesting. The idea of drawing and building, and so I jumped into that, and I loved it. But I also never could fully, I could never fully enter into that world because it's a service industry for very particular people, very particular companies, very particular clientele, and those worlds were still unfamiliar to me. But what I liked about it is that there were ideas embedded in the making of buildings, and I wondered if the things that were circling in my head could enter into the making of buildings. And it's still a struggle. I'm still trying to figure out how to do it, and I'm also still trying to figure out how to teach it to students, because for example, I'm teaching a studio right now, and my students, I took them to travel to New Mexico and southern Colorado and see buildings that are 1,000 years old, and to see buildings that were built just a year ago, and that span, centuries, but also span cultures and technologies. And students are really valuable to me because I can ask questions to 15 genius minds, and they come back with 15 different brilliant answers about really complex questions.
Different now than probably our answers would have been back then,
Yeah, exactly.
right? Um, I'm sorry, I'm still so curious about your growing up in this tiny town, being in this tiny town where we are now, although this is like a metropolis compared to where you grow up. How did you, so you said through TV, you, through the three channels was how you kind of got information of the outside world. I mean, where did you go to school? Was there school there in the
Yeah,
village and then you went to
no,
college in Colorado?
not there wasn't a school in the little village there. It was, and it's not that far away. It's the town where the school uh, was not a far drive, but for some reason, all the rural kids got picked up in a bus. So it was an hour long bus ride to the school every day, back and forth. In some way, I can't believe I did that. I spent 2 hours on the bus every day for 15 years. Um, and in some way, it was a beautiful thing because you were in this community of all the kids that rode the bus from all these little villages. There were many villages, and the bus just went all through all these countryside, picking up rural kids and dump us off in town at 8 o'clock in the morning. Uh, and so that was just an experience. Sometimes, I mean, to be honest, every time I see a yellow school bus, I still get a little bit stressed out.
Shake it.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, but I forgot the question. But yeah, that was the experience. And,
I mean,
it's very cold. So it was challenging to ride a bike or anything. So you're just on this bus for, I'm still actually friends with my bus drivers. I still think about my bus drivers a lot. Some of my bus drivers have died. They're part of my community, and some are still alive, and I'm very close to them. And we still talk about life, in a way, life on the bus.
yeah,
How many days or months did I spend on that bus with everyone? And it was its own community in a way, a mobile community, a mobile village.
amazing, right?
Yeah.
Um, So then you graduated, you got your architect's degree, obviously. And then I'm curious about the evolution of your practice, right? Like, how did you start? Did you start as a service industry architect, as you were calling it, or were you right into making other things for yourself?
Um, no, once I went to graduate school in New York City, at Columbia, and im immediately after that, actually, I entered into academia accidentally. And
How do you do that accidentally?
how do you? Uh,
Although
I
most of my life is accidental, but I just want to hear
yeah,
you say
yeah.
it.
I just um, well, the story is that when I was in graduate school, there was a class that had the opportunity to go to Mali, Africa, and uh, I wanted to photograph everything possible in Mali, but film was expensive at that time, especially for a student. And so the I went to undergrad at the University of Colorado, and I was had a good relationship with the people in the slide library. Nobody uses a slide library anymore, but there was a slide
Okay,
library
like
where you
what's that? Should we tell people what that is? No.
yeah, a slide library is a place that you can look up images of buildings and or lots of art or anything, and you would go and you would check out a carousel and little slides, and it was the equivalent today of typing in a word on Google and pressing the images link, and you have a billion images at your disposal. Except there, you had a catalog of the images that they took and that were in that particular library. And so I said, I'm traveling to Africa, and I wondered if you would fund the film and I would give you copies of all the slides for your library. And so when I returned from that trip and after graduation, I went to the slide library and I was walking around, my old alma mater at undergrad, and I asked very naively, how does one become a professor? And they said, oh, you should go talk to the chair of the department. He'll answer those questions. So I went down there and he asked me a bunch of questions. And he says, well, do you have a portfolio? And I said, I have a portfolio. And he said, you want to start teaching next semester? And so all of a sudden I started teaching at the university, not even knowing how to teach. Everything that I knew how to teach was uh, just experience the teachers who taught me. And and that's how I stumbled into academia. It wasn't like a desire to do it. It wasn't a long-term dream. It was just, oh, how does one? Because I was still embroiled in the questions of school. I still had lots of questions and seeking lots of answers. Um, yeah,
Which, as you said, it's good to get your students' opinions and have that start churning your brain and inspire your thinking. I get it. It's
yeah.
happened all the way back then. And then what happened?
And then what happened? And then what happened?
And then what did you make?
Um, well, the very first class I ever taught uh, centered around this phenomena that was happening in Colorado at the time, that rural communities were um, embracing federal prisons as a form of economic development and bringing uh, the construction of federal prisons into their communities because they would bring jobs and they bring people, and I really had a lot of questions about that I was uncertain about. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Like, it's an architectural thing, it's a building thing, and I think the definition of architecture is that it transforms the world through building. So I posed that question to the 15 students. We visited a high security prison in Colorado. The highest security prisons in the US are in Colorado. And so we had an opportunity to visit the prison and then just ask questions about the relationship of prisons to design. And um, every the students posed their opinions through architecture. And at the same time I'm doing that, I'm also asking questions in my own practice and beginning a practice to think about larger issues in the world that aren't service related, that are simply saying, well, how does building affect the world around us? Um, and how can it affect us positively? Can it affect us negatively? And how can we develop the skills to catalyze our goals for the built environment, if that makes sense? In other words, you can provide a building to a client, but and you might understand its impact to that client, and you obviously want to do a good job for that client, but it has a larger impact beyond the client. It has an impact on its immediate surroundings, on the ecology of the surroundings, on the people in the community. And so buildings are really powerful. I mean, even as a footprint on the planet's ecosystem. And so those were big questions to ask. And I guess I became much more attracted to thinking about those questions rather than the service to a client.
Yeah.
At a certain point, I made a rule in my practice not to have clients. That it was really an academic practice about thinking about these larger challenges of society. And that was kind of the basis. And I joined with my partner at that time, Virginia Sanfratello, and we embarked on a series of investigations around those questions, and also have a lot of different collaborations along the way, working independently, and still asking those questions. And so yeah.
Yeah, I'm so glad I asked you this question, because it's such an one, I didn't know you didn't take clients, or you had that, rule for yourself, which I think is kind of fantastic to have those kind of guardrails and parameters. And also, I love that you came in the back door, like through academia, through, I feel like all creative people are curious, right? We ask a lot of questions. I personally, I can't stop asking questions about life, and everyone has their way um, of answering those, or trying to answer those, whether it's expressing through pain or writing, or whatever. And yours is through, as you said, your students, and querying and really investigating, and then making with like a collaborative making, right? You can't just build a building on your own. I wonder what else you do, because you obviously think a lot, like I think a lot, and I have to write personally. And I wonder, do you draw? I'm getting off topic a little, but I'm really curious. How do you deal with your creative brain? Asking, how do you deal with your creative brain?
Yeah, I draw a lot, probably draw every day. I write a lot. I might write every day at least a little bit. I try to archive some of my thoughts as collections and drawings. The entire practice of architecture is, as a well-known theorist says, it's this translation from drawing to building. And there's no guarantee that a drawing will become a building. And so there's a lot of investment in that drawing and all the ideas and processes that move you from that process. First striking a line, and then its transformation into a material reality. And it's really complex. So, I think it's all of that. And all of that is a lot of work, uh, and it's work that self-perpetuates itself, right? Once you draw one line, you have to do another. Once you write one word, you have to write another, and it just builds upon itself. And some of the times, those two worlds conflate. Um, you mentioned border walls architecture. I think that's one of those moments when those worlds conflated, between writing and drawing.
Can you talk a
And
little bit about that? That's where I was going next, actually,
yeah,
because you talk about drawing one line. Well, you talk about it.
yeah, drawing one line. So this good analogy, like drawing one line. At some point, the Army Corps of Engineers drew a line on a map through a representation of the world, and that line was meant to be a wall, and that was architecture for me. The drawing of the line on that map, and architecture in that was immensely transformative to the people, to the ecology, to animals, to the politics and emotions of people. And I was so fascinated by that simplicity and complexity folded together that I just started collecting stories about it. Stories of a line being drawn through an old woman's house, and the reality of that, what it means to build a wall through someone's house, a line being drawn through a city, a line being drawn through private property, through a Native American gravesite, and everything that means. And so I also wanted to illustrate those stories, but I wanted to illustrate them in a way that wasn't making a proposal like an architect would do, but it was offering commentary for dialogue. Might be the way I describe it. I still have trouble in describe what those are, because I think often people think that those drawings were propositions for a border. Like, we should make the border like this instead of like this. But that wasn't really the case. It was more, and I don't want to say they were satirical. I don't want to say they were tongue in cheek. I don't want to say they were like political cartoons. I just don't even know what they were, other than trying to communicate the complete ridiculousness of that world that unfolded at those moments where thousands and tons of steel were being put in place as a line, and what that did to birds that don't fly higher than the wall, what it did to people who had desires to move from one side to another and either went under or over or through. And yeah.
Isn't it amazing that people actually thought it was a submission for, I mean, how could that be?
Well,
I
because that's
mean,
what
that
art.
could be. That's a rhetorical question.
Yeah, but I think there's a clear answer to that question, because uh, it's because that's what architects do. When architects draw a line, it's meant to become a reality. And granted, uh, those drawings took place over a period of time when there was no wall, when a wall was being built, and then when a wall was quite established and normalized. And so each drawing reflects a, a different positionality relative to the reality of the wall. So when I was making drawings before a wall existed, they feel like propositions. They feel like proposals, because nothing was there, and here's a drawing. Here's an image of a wall with solar panels, for example. That was an early drawing I did back in 2009 or so, 2008. And it was commentary really on, like, what are we investing in as a national security? Can we invest in energy, or can we invest in this wall? And can energy provide security more than a wall can provide security? And so these are the questions. When the wall was very established, there were drawings of, for example, there's a drawing that shows a wall built out of cactus in Arizona. And that's really commentary. It's not to say, oh, we should build walls out of cacti instead of steel, but it's commentary on this fact that the Organ Pipe National Forest or wilderness area is supposed to be one of the most pristine protected landscapes in the United States. And yet we bulldozed right through it, destroying this plant that only grows in this one particular place in the United States. And so it was just simply suggesting the ridiculousness of an investment in the replanting or the planting of cactus rather than the planting of steel, or the building of steel. So the drawings were ridiculous, but also hopefully raised questions. But it depended on how deep you wanted to go into the drawing.
Yeah, but don't say ridiculous, because I'm sorry, that's what art is, right? We're contributing to a discourse on something, and it's beautiful in its illustration of that and the investigation, and to make people think. And don't say ridiculous.
Yeah,
I think that's what we have. That's what we're doing. That's what we have to do. We're thinking. We
right,
want other people to think.
right. No, I agree. Agree that art. Well, I think art. It's okay for art to be ridiculous because it doesn't hold any responsibility to
In
anything.
that sense, yes.
And and in a way, its only responsibility is to like really challenge us. Like everyone can say, "Oh, a banana with duct tape to a wall is ridiculous," and it is, but it's also profoundly, to some, it's like perplexing and raises all kinds of questions about what we value in the world and what we don't, and so many other questions, and uh, about ephemerality and so yeah, I mean, so yeah, that's it's complicated,
Yes.
right? That's
Yes.
but when it conflates design, that's when it becomes really challenging because
Yeah.
design and art are completely different, and design holds a responsibility. So whether those illustrations are art or design, I don't know, because there's a responsibility embedded in them to communicate or highlight problems, but um, there's also a notion that they don't have the responsibility to solve any problems. You know, we
Yeah.
can't solve problems with the drawing of cactus. You know.
Yeah. Well, I love you're holding that responsibility and not, your courage in getting it out there because you have a niche and your own um your own voice. That's really important. I feel like it's as a change, I feel like you're a change maker in that way that, yeah, you have to hold your responsibility to a point and then go for it, which is, I feel like, is what you're doing. Okay, two things. I want to know a little bit about 3D printing because I'm so fascinated by it. And then I want you to talk a little bit, if you would, about the two, I think they're both right now, the Getty and the Cooper Hewitt projects. Are they both now?
Mhm.
Those two.
The Getty was more of an exhibition of work, and that happened last week. And it was a part of the Pacific Standard Time in LA, and so it was a short term, more of a show and tell kind of endeavor, but put the work in front of lots of thousands of people. And the Cooper Hewitt project is now.
Okay, do you
Uh,
want to talk about those first, or you want to tell me about 3D printing?
uh, I'll try to do it simultaneously.
Okay, great.
Uh, okay, how can I do it simultaneously? Let's see. Well, I'll start with the Cooper Hewitt project, um, because the Cooper Hewitt project isn't 3D printed, but maybe for me, in a way, it's somewhat the origins of my interest in 3D printing. The Cooper Hewitt is a project that tells the story of some of the traumas of where I'm from, which relates to indigenous slavery. And it's really a complex story of the overlay of the Mexican-American War, the Civil War, the the colonization or the settlement of what is now Colorado, um, and the transitions between indigenous land, Mexican land, I say indigenous land, Spanish land, Mexican land, and Colorado territory under the United States. And throughout that history, there was a practice of indigenous slavery that really unfolded historically in this very particular building that I'm a steward of, which was a Ute Indian agency that was built in 1855, just down the road from the ranch where I live, and it's kind of the center of the community because it holds the courthouse and the church today, and it was kind of a founding um, settlement in Colorado, and so this very humble earthen building was once an opulent fort of the first lieutenant governor of Colorado and the Indian agent to the Tabawacha Ute, where when 5,000 Utes lived in right there on that site. And one of the confusions I've always had is, well, where did everybody go? Where did all those people go? And some were uh, relocated, but in many ways we continue to exist within our cultural and genetic makeup of how we live our lives and build our buildings and so I wanted to tell that story of ancestors um, who were embroiled in this practice of indigenous slavery. And so that's the project at the Cooper Hewitt. And so basically, in a nutshell, what I have been doing over the last 6 years is, as a steward of this building, the project is called Exhuming Home. And I have been conceptually exhuming this history, digging up this history of my community to tell the story. But also, much of the building that was destroyed in the 70s was pushed and knocked into this big hole. I'm exhuming that hole. I'm exhuming the actual building that was made out of adobe, and I remade adobes on this building. But all the artifacts that I found along the way, I'm including them on and in the adobes to tell the story of an everyday life that unfolds layered with the traumas of this practice that that I feel still affects our communities too.
Wow. And what kind of things are the Adobe blocks still intact in the
Uh,
hole?
no, they're not. So they turned back to earth, and so
Yeah.
I remade adobes out of what was once an adobe. And there's about 300 of them that were made. And so in the exhibit at the Cooper Hewitt, each adobe has an artifact, a purposeful artifact found, or it has the name or an image of that history. And in this building, there was a census written in 1865 following the Civil War that documented 147 indigenous people that were held in slavery in that community. And so it has the names of those people on the adobes in the handwriting of the person, of the agent who wrote those names, and it has the name, the tribal affiliation, and the age. And most of them were children, and most of them were women.
Is that it?
That's it. That's one of the images. So that book was found there on the site. That Bible was found on the site. Image of the plaza with the church that still exists, Conejos Plaza, and that's one of the adobes of the building, and that's the structure. So it's a little bit like a library or an archive in a way. Rosalid, she's 19 and she's Navajo, and there was a draft horseshoe uh, that you saw. That's the structure, which
That's the structure.
that's the structure that holds all of the adobes. Yeah.
And what is the village? What does your town think of this?
Well, that's a good question. You know, everyone is happy that I'm doing. I think there's right now there's a community that's interested in this, and so I think it's um, starting to raise curiosity, and it started in a very impactful way, I would say. So I think it's in some ways it started big, and now it's starting to um, reach everyone. I hope it hasn't reached
What do
everyone,
you
but it's okay. I'm being vague, but
That's okay.
I invited an artist, Chip Thomas, who's a very well known, very talented paste up graffiti artist who um, to install this 1865 census on the building itself. Uh, and that work and this issue related to indigenous slavery comes from the New York Times right away. It became a New York Times story. And I don't think necessarily a lot of people in my community read the New York Times.
Mm.
And so the story started there. And I have to credit a relative of mine, Esteban Rael Galvez, who's a scholar on indigenous slavery, who's really is taking on this topic in a very big way, creating an archive of all descendants of ancestors who were at some point held in bondage or captivity or slavery through an organization called Native Bound Unbound. And so it became a very national issue in that way through the press, and now it's a very nationally presented project at the Cooper Hewitt, But the goal is that I can tell this story in my own community. So that's what I mean. I think it's an audience that's not quite the audience that I want it to reach. But that's not to say it's not reaching that audience, because there is a related exhibition to Chip Thomas's installation at a local museum called the Fort Garland Museum. And they are working in beautiful ways to connect descendants to the history of their ancestors. And so that's pretty amazing. I would say they're doing the hard work over there.
But you started.
Yeah.
You started.
Well, no,
Inspired.
my Esteban started my Esteban Rael Galvez, I think, started this because it's a lifelong work for him. And because I'm the steward of this building, it turns out that his dissertation, his PhD dissertation, really centered in some ways on this particular building. And I was unaware of that. And so he enlightened me that I was stewarding this building with a much deeper history than I knew.
I love that. I love that. I love the like, you know, the web of ancestry all working towards the same end goal, right? And the digging, and it's amazing. You said that was one of the, well, not a precursor to, but you would go into the 3D printing.
All right, like, what does this have to do with 3D printing?
Something.
You know, I mentioned my father was a builder, and my family lived in houses made of mud. My father built adobe houses, and often if we did a remodel of something, I was always helping him. I worked alongside him for years and years. We'd work on adobe houses. It was very normal for me to think about buildings made of mud. That's mostly what I thought buildings were made out of. And then when I went to graduate school, it was the dawn of the digital era. We were one of the first schools in the world to use computers in a very intense way at Columbia University. And so at a certain point, I was wondering how mud could be a modern material. And I wrote a book in 2008 called Earth Architecture. And that book discusses earth as a modern material, not as a historic material or vernacular material, but as a material that could reflect, at that time, a 20th century life and a 20th century kind of architecture. And in that book, I speculated on the future of earth and architecture. So back when I wrote this in 2006, 2007, I wrote that, that I thought 3D printing might be a future for the material. Because in a way it was very similar. You're taking mud and you're plopping it down, you're adding it bit by bit. And so after I wrote that, I moved to Berkeley and I became a professor at Berkeley, and I thought that maybe I should actually do that. I should take on that challenge of seeing if 3D printing could be a material for additive manufacturing, for 3D printing. And it took me on a journey and a project that I call Emerging Objects. And Emerging Objects eventually came like a side studio or major studio that I co-founded, and it in the search for Earth, a way to 3D print Earth, we stumbled across the possibility of 3D printing lots of materials based on the same ethos, that you can take the material that's in your landscape and you can use it for construction. You can use it for 3D printing in this case. So salt, recycled tires, sawdust, recycled grape skins, recycled coffee grounds, they all became a material exploration, just like thinking what's around us in the kitchen, what's around us in the landscape, and through all that, the goal was, for me, how do you print with Adobe? And maybe around 8 years ago, well, really like in, 14 years ago, started 3D printing with ceramics, but later started 3D printing with ceramics in a way that felt like if we could scale that, it would be possible to 3D print Adobe at a large scale.
Because ceramics were, well, can you explain what 3D printing is to everyone?
so what is 3D printing? 3D printing might be described as making something additively, meaning you add material over and over and over again. But humans have been doing that with their hands for millennia, but adding it with a machine based on instructions from a computer. And so in some cases, it's a small robot that produces objects out of plastic. Mostly people know that. But in bigger cases, it's a machine that's controlled by a computer that can deposit lots of material. And my interest in clay was it was squeezing clay out of a tube like toothpaste, but in a very guided, precise way. And I was interested in making structural shapes out of clay that were, most of 3D printing says you design an object and hopefully the print looks exactly like the object on the screen. But I was trying to make quirks in that process that were difficult to design as a surface, but as a line, like making a squiggle. And a corrugated piece of metal is strong because it has a squiggle in it. If it's flat, it's all floppy. Same is true with earth. If you have a corrugation, it's stronger than if it's straight. And so we started developing a way of building ceramics that do this. And then there was a whole lot of possibilities, and it launched emerging objects into a world of ceramics because we were producing objects with textures that people hadn't really seen before. And so there's been all these detours, like suddenly it's ceramics for several years, but the goal is always pushing towards earth. And then I was fortunate enough to have a collaboration. I pitched an idea to a company and I said, hey, can we build a printer? I made a sketch. Can we build a printer that does this out of earth instead of clay? And they agreed. The company is called 3D Potter, and they were making a ceramic printer that I started. I think I was one of the first users of that printer and started to produce these objects. And so we kind of came up together through ceramic production, and their machines kind of kept getting visibility simultaneously. So they agreed to collaborate on a machine, and that machine, after a couple of years, we had the confidence to print some of the first Adobe structures, definitely the first Adobe structures that are pure earth, and some of the first in the world. And it's just been my total passion, for the last 16 years, this goal. And so finally, I'm able to print very large building size structures out of Adobe just from the dirt around. And so it's very connected to my experiences growing up on the ranch, where buildings were made out of Adobe. My father was building houses out of Adobe. We're fixing buildings out of Adobe, making Adobe, and then just translating all that traditional knowledge into new knowledge that was technologically based. And it's coming together. I'm very excited. And what's interesting is that the art world has really embraced it and has been very supportive of this work and puts a lot of value on it. But I'm also interested in making architecture, and it's a different value system. And so I'm trying to cross the line back into architecture and to see if we can think about how this way of building might respond to a 21st century culture of living.
Which is pretty incredible, listening to your trajectory, being in the student, being with students and asking into you actually, I mean, you still do that, but also making and creating this really original, groundbreaking material. I mean, it's, mixed with technology, it's really exciting. So bravo for that. It's really cool.
Yeah,
It's really cool.
thanks.
And also a good segue into talking a little bit about what you're going to be doing in Garzón, because we obviously don't have a gigantic robotic machine
Yeah,
in here. And also, if you would introduce Joanna, who's not here, but talk a little a bit about her and you're coming as a collaboration. Tell us.
sure. So I'm coming to Garzón with an artist, Joaquin Lopez, who is an artist who works with Adobe and who's influenced by Adobe architecture. And she also is from New Mexico and comes from heritage practice of Adobe. So her family lived in Adobe buildings made of Adobe, still live in buildings made of Adobe, and so she's directly connected to it traditionally and historically, but interprets it through sculpture, through large scale sculpture, and um, so we are going to make a collaborative project, and the project is yet to unfold and come to conclusions, but we're very inspired by what I understand is the national bird of Uruguay. Some sites say it's not the national bird, other sites say it is the national bird, but it's called the hornero.
I
And
don't think it's a national bird.
it's not the national, but it's a very celebrated bird in
Very. I mean, maybe it is, and I'm totally wrong. I'm going to get in so much
yeah,
trouble for saying the wrong thing.
yeah.
I'm not saying it.
I'm trying to figure out exactly. There are some sites that say this is the national bird, and other sites say that's not the national bird.
But that bird's nest is everywhere.
And it's such a beautiful nest because hornero uh, means the oven maker, and an oven in Spanish is horno, and so it makes these beautiful oven-like structures as their nest out of mud. And in relationship to this topic about migration, it's always been interesting to me to think about how the technology of building ovens uh, immigrated from the Iberian Peninsula 500 years ago, and um, and that cooking technology became so popular in the Americas that it's continued to be used today by traditional peoples in the Americas, and that there's this beautiful bird that makes this unbelievable nest. And while the hornero itself is not a migratory bird, it's a bird that makes this evocation of this migratory structure. But so and we haven't fit all these pieces together conceptually, but maybe we don't have to. But I love the idea of thinking about this relationship between birds, migration, the migration of technologies, the migration of peoples, and also this idea of home, which is embedded in this idea of migration. And that this nest is the bird's home. And so the project is going to attempt to conflate these ideas of home and cooking technology together in a way that maybe gives us warmth, gives us sustenance, gives us some enclosure, and uh, and also, you know, not only the cooking technology but the material technology of building with Adobe, both migrated to the Americas, but there were traditional practices of building in mud in the Americas prior to that. And so it became, as I was mentioning very early on, it became a hybrid system of understandings, of technological sharings, of traditions of building. And so that's kind of what this project is going to explore.
Love it. And you guys will be actually building.
We'll be actually building, yeah. So
Right. So
we just ordered 1,000 adobes from
from
there from a local
from Jose Ignacio, I think.
from
It,
Jose.
so if you come to Garzón, anybody, you can like drive down the street and see and meet Ron and Joanna at some point. It's really cool to talk to you, and also I'm just so excited for you to be here because the whole artists in this cohort, there's so much crossover that I'm not going to tell you everything now because I want you to get excited when you get here and meet everybody. But it's amazing how it happens every year that the cohorts become this ecosystem and overlap each other and really inspire each other, and everyone comes from their own place and point of view, but there is a lot of crossover in thinking and in materials, and I don't know, it's really exciting. So anything else? I think we're at time.
Yeah, no, I am so super excited. Some of the artists I know personally, and so it's going to be so great to spend time with them. And some of them I'm fascinated by their work, so I'm excited to learn more and to learn about this place and really dive deep and spend time with you. And so I'm really honored. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for talking to us today. You guys, if anyone listening, please check out Ronald's work on Instagram. Is his most recent work, which is Rael, right? Rael.
All right. Yeah.
And we'll see you in Garzón next week, and we'll see everybody else at the festival on December 28th, 29th, and 30th. So can't wait to see you. Happy travels, and we'll talk.
We'll see you soon, Heidi.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Ciao. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.